Welcome to video number 54, and today's video is based on the effect of a price change on consumer well-being. Now let us analyze how price changes lead to change in consumer well-being. We have seen in our earlier videos that price changes take the consumer from one indifference curve to another. Uh, the question is, can we quantify the effect of a given price change on the consumer well-being? Uh, can we measure the effect of a price change on the consumer's welfare? For this question to answer, economists use three different approaches. The first approach is that of compensating variation. The second one is called equivalent variation, and the third one is change in consumer surplus. Compensating variation implies what change in income would restore the consumer's well-being to what it was before the price change. The equivalent variation implies what change in the consumer's income would have an equivalent effect on the consumer's well-being as the price change. And consumer surplus is the area to the left of the demand curve above the price, and change in the consumer surplus means area to the left of the demand curve between the before and the after prices. Look at this diagram. Here we are analyzing compensating variation for a price change. So let us start with the indifference curve I1, and initially the budget line is equal to L1, and assume that the price of DVD we measure along the vertical axis, and quantity of CDs we are measuring along the horizontal axis. We assume that the price of DVD is equal to $20 per DVD, and the price of CDs is equal to $15 per CD. Income of the consumer is equal to 300. So when income is 300, price of DVD is $200 and price of CD is $1,500, that the consumer can purchase 20 units of CD when he spends all his income on the purchase of CD, or he can purchase 15 units of CDs if he spends his entire income on purchasing DVDs, or any combination of CDs and DVDs in between the two extremes. So when L1 is the budget line, then the consumer is at point E1, and here the consumer is consuming 12 units of CDs when the price of CD per unit is $15. Now take the second situation. Let us suppose price of DVD is remaining the same at $20 per DVD. Money income still remaining the same at $300, but now the price of CD has increased from $15 to $30 per CD. Now the budget line will swing downward, and now the consumer will be in equilibrium at point E2. So it means that change in the price of CD from $15 per CD to $30 per CD has taken the consumer from E1 situation to E2, and this difference between E1 and E2, or change in the quantity demanded from 12 to 6, is the price effect or the total effect of an increase in the price of CD. Now let us suppose uh, price of DVD remains the same. Price of let us suppose price of DVD is still $20. Price of CD has increased to $30, and we want to compensate the consumer for the loss in his well-being. So how much income compensation would be necessary to enable him for the loss of his well-being? Now we will have to shift the budget line from L2 in such a way that the new fictitious budget line is parallel to the L2 budget line, but it is tangent to the original indifference curve. And now the consumer choice is E star, and here the consumer is now consuming 9 units. So this total effect is the sum of the two effects, the substitution effect and the price effect. Substitution effect is a movement from E1 to E star, and income effect is a movement from E2 to E star, and both of them are equal to -3, so the total effect, which is equal to substitution effect and income effect, is equal to -6. So it means compensating variation in this case will be equal to 450 minus 300, and that will be equal to $150. So it means that if you want to compensate the consumer for the loss of his welfare due to increase in the price of CD, then we will have to give him $150, and that will compensate him for the loss of his welfare. Now let us analyze the case of equivalent variation. Again we start with the I1 indifference curve and L1 budget line. When income is equal to $300, price of DVD is still $20, but and price of CD is $50. So again, originally his choice is at E1 when he is consuming 12 units of CDs. Now let us suppose that price of DVD remains the same, income remains the same, but price of CD has increased from $15 per CD to $30 per CD. So again, the budget line will swing downward, and the consumer is now shifted from E1 to E2, and at E2 he is now consuming 6 units of CD. So the movement from E1 to E2 is the total price effect. Now we are analyzing this case in terms of equivalent variation. What it means, how much income the consumer has lost due to the change in the price, real income I mean. So price of DVD remaining the same at $20, price of CD is $15. Money income is now equal to $200. So it is as if his income has decreased by $100. His previous income was $300, but the new income shown by L star budget is 200, and the difference between the two is equal to $100. So this is called equivalent variation. The third approach is that of the consumer surplus. The area to the left of the demand curve for CDs between the price before, that is $15, and the after price, that is $30, is another dollar measure of the welfare effect of the price change. One can ask the question, how does this measure compare to our other two measures of compensating variation and equivalent variation? So here we can show in this diagram that equivalent variation will be equal to compensating variation when there is no income effect of a price change. The original situation is as before. Price of DVD is $20, price of CD is equal to $15, money income of consumer is equal to $300, and the consumer is at point E1. L2 and I2 is the case when the price of CD has increased from $15 to $30, price of DVD and money income remaining the same, Now the consumer is at point E2, and here both the equivalent variation and the compensation variation is equal to each other. Now here we have drawn the indifference curves in such a way that they have the same slope at any specific value of C, that is compensation. This is the reason why there is no income effect on the consumption of CDs. Now if you see, the total effect is equal to 8 minus 6, or the movement from E1 to E2. If you use the compensation variation, then L1 star is the budget line, but the consumer is still purchasing 6 units. And if we use equivalent variation, then L2 star is the budget line, and in both the cases the change in the quantity of CD is 8 minus 6, that is minus 2, and income effect is 0. So in both the cases in both the cases compensation variation and equivalent variation here are equal to $100, and they are equal. The common value of equivalent variation and compensating variation in this case is also equal to the dollar value of the amount of DVDs that would compensate for or be equivalent to the changes in the price of CDs. Well-being can also be measured with the help of demand curve. When a change in the price of a good X has no income effect on the consumption of good X, the equivalent or compensating variations of the price change are consistent dollar measures of the effect of the price change on the well-being of the consumer. The equivalent variation and compensating variation of a price change can also be measured by making use of the demand curve. And for that we can use willingness to pay and height of the demand curve. Now, the height of the demand curve in this diagram tells us a lot about the consumer's well-being. When the quantity of good X is 12, the height of our demand curve tells us that the price of the good is equal to $20. But the theory of consumer choice tells us that this amount also be the dollar value of the additional amount of good Y that would be just as desirable as an additional unit of good X. So rational choice implies that the price ratio must be equal to the marginal rate of substitution of X for Y. Therefore, Px and Px will be equal to price of Y times marginal rate of substitution. Willingness to pay. The consumer's willingness to pay for an additional CD is measured by the dollar value of the additional amount of DVDs that would have an equal effect on the consumer's well-being. In this schedule, you see that the willingness to pay of the consumer for the first CD is 100, for the second it is 80, for the third it is 70, and for the fourth this is $50. So as the quantity of CDs increases, the consumer willingness to pay for CD is going to decrease. And this diagram also shows various willingness to pay at various prices, that is willingness to pay first CD bought, willingness to pay when second CD is bought, and so on. The height of the demand curve at any quantity shows the willingness to pay of whoever bought the last unit. Now, as you know, the area of the rectangle can be measured by multiplying the width and the height. So we can use that principle to measure willingness to pay, and that is equal to the area under the demand curve. So if you see, we can sum up all these areas of willingness to pay, and then we can differentiate between the total payment, consumer surplus, and total willingness to pay. So when price of the CD is P1, then Q1 units of CDs are consumed by the consumer, and we have this situation. We can differentiate between three different things. The area under the demand curve measures the dollar value of the DVDs that would compensate for or be equivalent to Q1 CD. Now, let me tell you, uh, this is the blue line is the demand curve, A is the vertical intercept, and the triangle which is blue shaded ABC shows consumer surplus. The triangle, the rectangle OBCQ1 shows total payment for Q1 units of CD when the price is P1, and the sum of the consumer surplus and total payment gives us total willingness to pay of the consumer, which is equal to OACQ1. How the price affects consumer surplus? Uh, the blue shaded area under the demand curve and between the before and after prices P1, P2 measures the change in the consumer surplus that is caused by the price change. This is also the dollar value of the other good, the one whose price is changed that would compensate for price change. This is also equal to the compensating variation and equivalent variation of the price change when the income effect is zero. And in fact, change in consumer surplus will be equal to equivalent variation and compensating variation when there is no income effect. Now, summing up, when the income effect of a price change is zero, the change in the consumer surplus is equal to the dollar amount that is equivalent to and would compensate the price change. That is, consumer surplus is equal to compensating variation is equal to change in consumer surplus, and that in turn is equal to equivalent variation. So in this case, change in consumer surplus is an excellent measure of the effect of price change on the consumer's well-being. But even when the income effect is not equal to zero, change in consumer surplus is a useful approximate measure of the effect of a price change on the welfare. And that boils out to 2 points. Compensating variation is less than change in consumer surplus is less than change in equivalent variation when income effect is positive, normal good. Compensation variation is greater than change in consumer surplus is greater than equivalent variation when the income is positive. Market demand and individual demand curves. Market demand refers to the sum of all individual demands for a particular good or service. And graphically, individual demand curves are summed up horizontally to obtain the market demand curve. And you can see in this diagram, there are two consumers, Catherines and Nicholas, and if we sum up the quantity demanded of these two consumers at given prices, then it gives us market demand curve, which is shown on the right hand side. Effect of a price change on aggregate demand. We have aggregate well-being. We have seen that when the income effect of a price change is zero, the change in individual consumer surplus is the area to the left of the demand curve between the before and after prices, and that is equal to equivalent variation and compensating variation, and is therefore a meaningful dollar measure of the change in the individual's well-being. Effect of a price change on aggregate well-being. Similarly, the area to the left of the aggregate demand curve between the before and after prices is a meaningful dollar measure of the effect of a price change on aggregate well-being. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being with me. Kindly like the video, share with your friends so that its benefit can reach to the maximum number of people. If you haven't yet subscribed to the channel, kindly do so and click on the icon bell so that you can get notification for new videos to be uploaded in future. Thank you.